Chapter 1. The Stitch of Silence. The rain in the Jinggan district of the capital, Jinling, was a persistent gray smear against the already muted colors of the garment district. It clung to the narrow alleyways, slicking the cobblestones and turning the air damp and heavy with the scent of wet silk, oiled leather, and 1,000 simmering grievances. It was a perfect night for a blind man to be miserable, and Zhuo Feng, currently hunched over a worn wooden table in Master Wu's tiny tailoring shop, felt it acutely. He wasn't entirely blind, not anymore. The accident, a stray lightning strike during a particularly violent summer storm, had robbed him of his sight, but it hadn't stolen the echoes of the world. He felt the press of the table against his palms, the coarse texture of the leather he was stitching, the subtle shifts in the air as Master Wu, a wizened man with hands as rough as granite, barked out instructions. He could even sense, faintly, the simmering resentment radiating from the other apprentices, their nimble fingers a whirlwind of activity, while his hands, clumsy and hesitant, seemed to move in slow motion. Zhuo Feng was, by all accounts, a disastrous apprentice. He possessed a lineage steeped in wealth and power, the Zhuo clan, one of the empire's most influential merchant families, controlling the flow of iron from the Dragon's Teeth Mountains and commanding a network of fortified trading posts. Yet, he was forced to spend his days mending threadbare tunics and stitching heavy leather armor, a task he found profoundly insulting. Head inherited not only the clan's fortune, but also a secret far more significant, the Heavenly Loom, a lost internal martial art whispered about in the clan's ancient texts. The loom granted its practitioner the ability to manipulate invisible threads of energy, to sew an opponent's movements into stillness, to unravel their very defenses. It was a power he desperately wanted to understand, to control, but one his father, the formidable Lord Zhuo, deemed a dangerous obsession. "The loom is a weapon, Feng," Head roared during their last strained conversation. "A weapon for the truly desperate. It corrupts. It demands a price. You are meant to guide the trade, not to become a phantom warrior." So, had taken a course in deception, a brutal apprenticeship in humility, and secured a position as a tailor's assistant at Wu's shop, hoping to disappear into the anonymity of the district, to learn the art of patience and, hopefully, the secrets of the loom in the shadows. Tonight, he was working on a particularly difficult piece, a breastplate for the city guard, reinforced with overlapping scales of blackened steel. The dampness made the leather stubbornly resistant to the needle, and his fingers, used to the delicate manipulation of silken fabrics, ached with the strain. "Slower, boy." Master Wu's voice, sharp and impatient, snapped him from his concentration. "You are costing us time. The guards will be expecting this by morning, and a delayed shipment means a dissatisfied patron and a loss of coin." Before Zhuo Feng could respond, a shadow fell across the table. It was Liang, the arrogant and perpetually unpleasant son of Master Geng, the most prominent silk merchant in the district. Liang was a walking embodiment of everything Zhuo Feng was trying to escape: entitlement, cruelty, and a breathtaking lack of empathy. "Still struggling, little tailor?" Liang sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let me guess, you're still wrestling with that pathetic piece of leather? A blind dog should be grateful for the scraps his thrown, you know. Perhaps you should be polishing my boots instead of wasting your time on the guard's armor." Zhuo Feng kept his expression neutral. Had learned quickly that arguing with Liang was a futile exercise in humiliation. Instead, he focused on the stitching, the rhythmic push and pull of the needle, a small, silent rebellion against the boy's taunts. "Your lack of respect is tiresome, Liang," he said, his voice deliberately measured. Liang's laughter echoed through the small shop. "Respect? From a blind beggar? You are a mockery, Zhuo Feng. A stain on the Zhuo name. Your father should have left you to starve." Just as Zhuo Feng was bracing himself for another round of abuse, a gentle voice intervened. "Liang, please." You are disrupting Master Wu's work. It was Lian, a young seamstress who worked alongside them, her movements quick and precise, her eyes carrying a quiet, observant quality. She was a small, unassuming figure, but she possessed a surprising strength and a fierce loyalty. Don't you worry about him, Lian, Liang scoffed. He's just a useless waste of space. Perhaps Master Wu should find a more productive assistant. He deliberately bumped into Zhuo Feng's table, sending the leather breastplate tumbling to the floor. Watch your tongue, Zhuo Feng said, rising to retrieve the scattered pieces. But before he could, Lian swiftly stepped forward, gathering the leather and neatly placing it back on the table. It's all right, Zhuo Feng. We all have our burdens. She offered him a small steamed bun, still warm from the steam, a silent offering of comfort. You look weary. Eat and rest your hands. As Zhuo Feng accepted the bun, a small, almost imperceptible movement flickered through him. It wasn't visible, not to the casual eye, but it was there. A subtle hum of energy, a nascent awareness of the power within, a reminder of the secret he carried, hidden beneath layers of humility and disguised as a blind tailor's assistant. The rain continued to fall, washing over the Jinggan district, carrying with it a silent promise of secrets and the potential for a reckoning. Chapter 2. Silver Thread and Stone. The rhythmic patter of rain against the corrugated iron roof of Wu's workshop was punctuated by the gentle snip of Lian's shears. Zhuo Feng, seated at the worn oak table, meticulously stitched a complex pattern onto a scarlet silk tunic, the damp fabric sticking slightly to his fingertips. The act of focusing on the intricate needlework, the precise movements demanding concentration, was a carefully constructed shield, dampening the awareness of the surging power within him. He focused on the feel of the silk, the pull of the thread, the subtle shift in pressure against his skin, anything to avoid a sudden and uncontrolled release. Liang, predictably, continued his torment. He was currently attempting to assess Zhuo Feng's stitching speed by loudly proclaiming the virtues of a particularly ornate design from the imperial court. A design, Zhuo Feng noted with a simmering resentment, that was currently adorning the emperor's daughter's gown. Honestly, Liang boomed, his voice echoing in the cramped space, a simple saddlebag would possess more artistry than this. You're wasting your talents, Zhuo Feng. Utterly wasting them. Zhuo Feng didn't respond, his fingers moving with deliberate, agonizing slowness. He deliberately layered a stitch, then another, forcing himself to concentrate on the mechanics of the act, anchoring his mind to the tangible. He felt the familiar thrum of the Heavenly Loom, a subtle vibration deep within his bones, a constant, low-level hum that he fought to suppress. It was a dangerous current. This power, seductive, exhilarating and terrifying in its potential. Lian, observing his struggle, quietly adjusted the lighting, positioning a small oil lamp to cast a warmer glow on his work. You're growing frustrated, Zhuo Feng, she said softly, her voice barely audible above the rain. It's all right to feel the pull. It's a testament to your potential. Potential for what? Zhuo Feng muttered, his voice tight with suppressed anger. For more humiliating tasks, for being treated like a discarded rag. Potential for mastery, Lian countered, offering him another steamed bun, this one slightly cooled. Master Wu has trained for decades. You possess a gift unlike any he has ever encountered. Don't let the boy's arrogance dim your light. Suddenly, Liang's face contorted with a malicious grin. He snatched a small, worn wooden mallet from the corner, and with a casual flick of his wrist, sent it hurtling across the room. It struck Zhuo Feng's meticulously arranged collection of needles, sending them scattering across the floor. There! Liang crowed. A complete disaster. Look at your mess, Zhuo Feng. Perhaps a tailor's life isn't suited to you after all. This time, Zhuo Feng didn't restrain himself. The carefully constructed wall of humility crumbled. A wave of energy pulsed outwards from him, barely contained, but undeniably present. The air shimmered momentarily, and a scattering of dust motes danced in the lamplight. He didn't strike Liang, didn't even move his hands. Instead, he focused on the fallen needles, a single, silver thread extending from his fingertips, weaving itself around each piece of metal with impossible speed and precision. The needles floated back to the table, perfectly aligned, as if guided by an invisible hand. The effect wasn't dramatic, not a spectacular display of power. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. But Lian gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Even Liang, momentarily stunned, faltered in his triumphant laughter. What was that? He stammered, his bravado evaporating. Zhuo Feng immediately seized the opportunity. He calmly retrieved the needles, meticulously arranging them on his workbench. A simple matter of organization, he said, his voice deliberately neutral. One learns to appreciate order when one is surrounded by chaos. He deliberately emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the air, a veiled threat. But it was Lian who noticed something far more significant. As he manipulated the needles, he hadn't simply moved them, had subtly altered their positions, creating a microscopic locking mechanism. On one of the finer needles, a mechanism that wouldn't be apparent to any human eye, but one that, if activated, would cause the needle to instantly shatter upon contact with metal. He had, in effect, imbued the needle with a subtle, deadly enchantment. He subtly shifted his gaze to Liang, a cold, assessing look in his dark eyes. The eyes that no longer saw darkness, but held a contained storm. "You underestimate me, Liang," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You see only a blind tailor's assistant. You do not see the threads I can weave, the control I possess. You don't realize you are dancing on the edge of a far more dangerous game." The rain outside intensified, mirroring the rising tension in the small workshop. The air thrummed with an almost tangible energy. Zhuo Feng knew he couldn't afford to reveal himself completely, not yet. But he had shown Liang a glimpse of his power, a hint of the reckoning to come. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. Chapter 3: The Unraveling. The days following the Imperial Silk Gala were a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated chaos, a deliberate display of power veiled beneath the guise of quiet industry. Zhuo Feng, still bound by his blindness, moved through the garment district like a phantom, his reputation subtly shifting from pathetic assistant to something else. The guards who once snickered at his clumsy fingers now offered a cautious deference, and even the perpetually disgruntled vendors seemed to give him a wider berth. The whispers started, hushed and laced with a wary respect to the tailor. They called him, a name born of fear and intrigue. Master Gang, humbled and panicked, offered increasingly extravagant sums for Zhuo Feng's services, desperate to restore his reputation after his son's humiliating defeat. He showered him with the finest silk imported teas, and even attempted to commission a magnificent, gold-embroidered robe, an offer Zhuo Feng politely declined, stating his preference for simple, sturdy fabrics. He used the increased commissions to meticulously refine his skills, not in traditional tailoring, but in observing the subtle nuances of materials, studying their tensile strength, and experimenting with his techniques, a training ground for his hidden abilities. Lian, meanwhile, flourished in her new role. The Emperor's personal guard, a hulking veteran named Zhao, began to regularly visit the workshop, bringing her scrolls detailing the latest military strategies, and requesting her assistance in designing armor for the Emperor's elite cavalry. He saw in her a keen intellect, a sharp eye for detail, qualities he attributed to the blind tailor's touch. More importantly, he observed the almost unnerving way Zhuo Feng handled the fabrics, his movements precise and deliberate, radiating a contained energy that seemed to ripple through the very threads. The turning point came during a particularly intricate commission, a ceremonial banner for the Emperor's upcoming Dragon Festival. Master Gang, desperate to regain control, had demanded a banner incorporating a complex interwoven pattern of jade and gold silk, a design requiring extraordinary precision and an almost unsettling amount of force to manipulate. He pushed Zhuo Feng relentlessly, demanding a speed and accuracy that bordered on impossible. "Faster, Tailor. The Emperor's favor waits for no one," Gang barked, his face flushed with frustration. He then deliberately snapped a small, unassuming needle, a seemingly minor act of aggression. Zhuo Feng didn't flinch. He simply stopped working, his head tilted slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the broken needle. Then, with a subtle shift of his hands, he began to subtly alter the surrounding needles on his workbench. The air around him shimmered for a heartbeat, almost imperceptible, and the needles, seemingly of their own volition, began to shift and rearrange themselves, locking into a complex, microscopic configuration. It was Lian who noticed. "Zhuo Feng," she whispered, her voice laced with a dawning comprehension. You were controlling them." He didn't deny it. "A simple matter of organization," he replied, his voice as neutral as ever, but a flicker of something akin to amusement danced in his eyes. "One learns to appreciate order when one is surrounded by chaos." He deliberately emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the air, a pointed reminder of the control he possessed. Suddenly, Liang, who had been lurking at the edge of the workshop, a sneer plastered across his face, reached out and seized a relatively dull iron shuttle. As his fingers closed around it, a barely audible crack echoed through the room. The shuttle, a simple tool used for guiding the silk, shattered into a dozen tiny fragments. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Even Gang, a man who prided himself on his shrewdness, stared in stunned disbelief. "Impossible," he sputtered, clutching his chest. "This shuttle is of the finest steel." Zhuo Feng simply observed him, his expression unreadable. "You underestimate me, Liang," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the workshop. "You see only a blind tailor's assistant. You do not see the threads I can weave, the control I possess. You don't realize you are dancing on the edge of a far more dangerous game." He reached out, not with a forceful gesture, but with a delicate touch, and picked up one of the shattered fragments of the shuttle. Holding it aloft, he focused, and a faint silver light emanated from his fingertips. The fragmented metal subtly rearranged itself, reforming into a perfect, seamless shuttle. The air grew colder, and a palpable sense of dread filled the workshop. Zhuo Feng was revealing more than just his power. He was demonstrating the source of it, the Heavenly Loom, and its terrifying potential. He wasn't simply manipulating fabrics, he was bending reality to his will. Suddenly, a small, intricately carved wooden box, one that Gang had presented him as a generous gift, tumbled from a shelf, spilling its contents across the workbench, a collection of delicate, silver needles, each seemingly imbued with an almost malevolent energy. Zhuo Feng casually collected them, examining each one with a deliberate intensity, a barely perceptible hum of power radiating from him. He picked up a needle, and with a single, precise movement, he severed it, not with a sharp cut, but with a shimmering wave of energy. "The threads unravel," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "and with them so too can your ambitions." Chapter 4. The Unraveling. The aftermath of the Silk Gala was a maelstrom of panicked whispers and bewildered awe. The Emperor, a man known for his pragmatism and ruthlessness, had been utterly cowed. Zhuo Feng, the unassuming tailor's assistant, had demonstrated a power so profoundly unsettling, so exquisitely controlled, that it threatened the very foundations of the Empire's military might. The Shadow Assassins, initially a terrifying display of lethal efficiency, were now frozen mid-attack, 30 men suspended in a grotesque tableau of helpless paralysis. News of the blind weaver spread like wildfire through the capital, carried on the wind and whispered in shadowed alleys. The city guard, once dismissive of the humble tailor, now regarded him with a mixture of fear and desperate reverence. Even the most jaded imperial officials, accustomed to displays of power, found themselves unnerved by the sheer precision of Zhuo Feng's ability. The workshop, previously a hive of mundane activity, was now a site of intense scrutiny. The emperor's personal guard, led by the grizzled general Zhao, a man who had commanded armies and crushed rebellions, knelt before Zhuo Feng, offering his sword in humble submission. "Great Weaver," Zhao said, his voice strained with deference. "We recognize the strength you wield. We pledge our loyalty to you." Zhuo Feng, seated on a stool amidst the scattered silk scraps and shimmering needles, regarded them with a quiet, unnerving calm. He hadn't spoken of his lineage, of the Zhuo clan, only of the Heavenly Loom. Had answered their questions with unsettlingly precise details about the art, revealing glimpses of its profound complexity without ever truly explaining its origins. "The loom is not merely a weapon," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "It is a reflection of intent. It responds to focus, to discipline, to chaos. It is a death sentence." He gestured with a hand, and one of the silver needles, previously inert, began to vibrate subtly, radiating a faint, cool light. Each thread holds potential, the capacity to bind, to sever, to shape. Control that potential, and you control the very fabric of reality. Lian, ever observant, noticed the shift in Zhuo Feng's demeanor. He wasn't merely demonstrating his power, he was experimenting, studying the needles, understanding their subtle resonances. She approached cautiously, carrying a small tray of steamed buns, a silent offering of comfort and sustenance. "You are troubled, master," she said softly, placing the tray on the workbench. "This artid is a heavy burden." Zhuo Feng accepted a bun, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "The burden of knowledge is always heavy, little weaver. But ignorance is a far greater danger. To wield this power without understanding it is to invite destruction not just for myself, but for all who stand in my path." He took a bite of the bun, chewing slowly, his eyes distant, lost in the intricate workings of the loom. The emperor, impatient with the cautious diplomacy, intervened. "Enough contemplation," he commanded, his voice echoing through the workshop. "You have brought order to chaos, Weaver. You have demonstrated your worth. I decree that you shall be given the title Silken Hand and command the entirety of the imperial silk trade. Master Gang and his son will be brought before me for judgment." Liang, stripped of his arrogance and now visibly trembling, was dragged before the emperor, flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. The sight of Zhuo Feng, seated calmly amidst the chaos, was enough to crush any lingering defiance. The emperor, with a single gesture, ordered Liang's banishment to the Iron Peaks, a desolate region notorious for its brutal conditions and unforgiving miners. Liang, a broken shadow of his former self, was given a single crude pickaxe and a sack of hardtack before being led away. As the dust settled, Zhuo Feng turned his attention to the collection of silver needles. He meticulously examined each one, his fingers tracing their delicate forms with an almost reverent touch. He noticed that while all possessed a similar inherent energy, they weren't identical. Some throbbed with a sharper, more aggressive potential. Others radiated a subtle, calming influence. "These," he murmured, his voice laced with a hint of melancholy, "are not merely tools. They are echoes, remnants of past wielders, their intentions imprinted upon the silver." He selected a needle that pulsed with a particularly strong chaotic energy, a needle that seemed to writhe with barely contained force. With a deliberate movement, he began to manipulate it, not with force, but with a profound understanding. He channeled his energy into the needle, guiding its flow, smoothing its jagged edges, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, taming its wild potential. As he worked, the air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and a strange resonance filled the workshop, a feeling of unraveling. Suddenly, a shimmering ripple distorted the space around him, as if the very fabric of reality was being momentarily disrupted. For a fleeting instant, Zhuo Feng glimpsed a terrifying vision, a vast, swirling vortex of silver threads, consuming everything in its path, a catastrophic manifestation of the Heavenly Loom, unleashed in its purest, most destructive form. He recoiled, instinctively pulling his hand away from the needle. The ripple vanished, and the workshop returned to normal, though a palpable sense of dread lingered in the air. "The loom demands balance," he said, his voice strained. "It can create, but it can also destroy. It is a force that must be respected, contained, and ultimately understood. And to truly understand it, one must be willing to relinquish certain attachments." He glanced at Lian, his eyes holding a depth of knowledge and sorrow. "The threads of ambition, little weaver, can be the most dangerous of all." Chapter 5. The unraveling of Gang. The dust of the imperial silk gala had settled, not on the opulent carpets of the tea-house, but on Zhuo Feng's reputation. The initial shock had given way to a nervous, almost reverent fascination. The emperor, a man known for his capricious whims and ruthless efficiency, sat on a cushion, staring at Zhuo Feng with an unnerving stillness. The personal guard, usually a bristling wall of bronze and steel, stood frozen, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. Master Gang, a man who'd once scoffed at Zhuo Feng's humble existence, now knelt before him, his silk robes pooling around his legs like a defeated tide. He offered a stammered apology, the words choked with the shame of his son's humiliation. "Your Excellency," he croaked, too was blinded. Blinded by pride, by arrogance. "I will undo my wrongs." Zhuo Feng, seated on a simple wooden stool, observed him with a quiet intensity. "Redress is not merely about words, Master Gang. It is about action. You have built your empire on exploitation, on the relentless grinding of others. That ends now." He gestured, and a squad of imperial guards, under the watchful eye of a newly appointed captain, swiftly dismantled Zheng's entire operation. The stalls, the looms, the finished silks, all meticulously sorted and loaded onto carts, ready for distribution across the capital. The wealth, previously hoarded in Zheng's coffers, was now being directed to the poorest districts, a stark counterpoint to his former greed. Liang, meanwhile, was a pathetic figure, dragged from the shadows of the tea-house by 2 guards. The iron mines were a grim prospect, a desolate expanse of rock and dust known for its unforgiving heat and brutal conditions. As they led him away, he spat defiantly. "You haven't heard the last of me, you blind fool." Zhuo Feng didn't react to the outburst. He was focused on Lian, who stood near him, her face a mixture of awe and apprehension. The young seamstress, despite her initial fear, was thriving in her newfound role. The emperor, recognizing her innate understanding of silk and a surprising strategic mind, had appointed her grand overseer of the imperial silk trade. The jade needle, pulsating with a serene white light, now rested in her hand, a symbol of her power and a testament to her discerning eye. "The threads, little weaver," Zhuo Feng said, his voice low, "are not merely for weaving cloth. They are a reflection of the world's energy, of its desires and its conflicts. The Heavenly Loom, it's a conversation, not a weapon. It responds to intent, to feeling." He paused, studying her. "You felt it, didn't you? The unraveling?" Lian nodded, her eyes wide. The workshop had felt as if the very air was dissolving. "I saw a torrent of silver, like a storm consuming everything." Zhuo Feng's expression hardened. "That is the loom's potential. Untamed, it is chaos. Controlled, it is creation, healing, and unfortunately, destruction. I spent years trying to understand it, to shape it. But you, little weaver, you possess an innate sensitivity. You can feel the threads more acutely than I ever could." He rose and walked to the window overlooking the bustling garment district. The noise of the city, the shouts of merchants, the clatter of carts, it all seemed strangely muted, as if filtered through an invisible layer. "I realized something during the gala," he continued, his gaze distant. "The assassins, they weren't just seeking the Emperor's daughter. They were seeking me. They sensed the loom within me, the potential for immense power. And they understood that this power, if left unchecked, could unravel not just them, but everything." He turned back to Lian, his eyes filled with a somber weight. "The needle, it's a key, but also a burden. It allows me to manipulate the loom, but it also makes me vulnerable. Every thread I pull, every pattern I create draws attention. The loom, it demands balance. It feeds on ambition, on passion, on the desperate desire for control." He reached out and gently took the jade needle from Lian's hand. As his fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface, he felt a familiar tremor, the subtle hum of the loom. A vast, silent ocean of energy flowing beneath the world. He began to manipulate the needle, slowly, deliberately, creating a miniature pattern in the air, a tiny, intricate dragon, scales shimmering with silver light. Suddenly, the workshop grew colder still. The shadows deepened, coalescing around him like a living entity. The air crackled with static electricity. The ripple effect returned, stronger this time, more pronounced. This wasn't the fleeting glimpse of chaos he had experienced before. This was a focused, deliberate distortion, as if someone or something was actively trying to disrupt his control. He struggled to maintain the dragon's form, his face contorted with effort. The loom was resisting, pushing back against his influence. "It's feeding," he gasped, his voice strained. "It wants to consume the parento, unravel it entirely." Lian watched, her face pale with fear. She understood now. The unraveling wasn't just a vision, it was a battle. Zhuo Feng wasn't just controlling the loom, he was fighting it. And he was losing. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The chill in the workshop intensified, biting through the layers of Zhuo Feng's simple tunic. The miniature dragon, so painstakingly crafted, flickered violently, its silver scales dissolving into a static haze. The air thrummed with an almost unbearable pressure, a dissonance that made his teeth ache. He fought with a desperate, instinctual fury, attempting to reinforce the pattern, to wrestle control back from the loom, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a single thread. "It's feeding," he choked out, sweat slicking his forehead. The jade needle in his hand vibrated intensely, the cool smoothness now radiating an unsettling heat. "It wants to consume the parento, unravel it entirely." Lian, her youthful face etched with a stark terror, moved closer, reaching out tentatively. "Zhuo Feng, stop. You're pushing yourself too far. The loom's not meant to be forced." He ignored her, his focus solely on the unraveling dragon. The silver light intensified, not emanating from him, but swirling around him in a vortex, distorting the fabrics of the workshop, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced like predatory spirits. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that this wasn't simply a fluctuation in the loom's power, it was actively attacking him, attempting to break his connection, to sever the thread that bound him to its immense potential. "It senses my ambition," he hissed, his voice barely audible above the escalating hum. "It knows I seek to use it, to reshape the world according to my will, and it resists. Fiercely." He realized with a chilling truth. The Heavenly Loom didn't simply grant power, it judged those who wielded it, and it clearly disapproved of his intentions. Suddenly, the workshop door burst open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the flickering light of the street master Zhao, the imperial archivist, a man renowned for his meticulous knowledge of ancient lore, and more importantly, his uncanny ability to sense disturbances in the flow of internal energy. He moved with a surprising speed, his face a mask of grim concentration. "Zhuo Feng." Zhao's voice cut through the chaotic hum, sharp and precise. "You've breached the veil." The Lumits responding to an external influence. A significant disturbance. He didn't pause to explain, instead drawing a small, intricately carved jade talisman from his sleeve. As he activated it, a wave of calming energy washed over the workshop, momentarily suppressing the swirling chaos and the agonizing pressure in Zhuo Feng's head. The dragon's image stabilized, though still fragmented and weak. "The Imperial Guard is on its way," Zhao continued, his gaze fixed on Zhuo Feng. "You must relinquish control immediately. This Heavenly Loom, as you call it, is not a tool for a mortal to command. It is a reflection of the universe's order, and your attempt to twist it threatens the very balance of things." Zhuo Feng felt a surge of defiance mixed with a profound understanding. Zhao was right. He hadn't considered the loom as a sentient entity, a judge of his worth. Had been so focused on the power itself, on the ability to reshape reality, that had blinded himself to the inherent danger. "It demands balance," he murmured, echoing the cryptic words had heard from the loom's initial whisper. "Every thread I pull, every pattern I create draws attention. But it's not just attention, it's judgment." As he spoke, the shimmering silver light around him intensified, coalescing into a humanoid form, a wraith-like figure, composed entirely of interwoven threads. It mirrored his own posture, a perfect, terrifying reflection, but its features were blurred, constantly shifting, its eyes burning with an ancient, chilling intelligence. "You seek to impose your will upon me," the figure hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers layered over one another. "You believe you can control the flow of creation? You are a fool. The loom does not obey, it selects." Lian, frozen with terror, watched as the ethereal figure reached out, its intangible hand brushing against Zhuo Feng's arm. He felt a searing pain, not physical, but a violation of his very essence, a probing of his deepest desires, his darkest fears. "It's showing Memi ambition," he gasped, clutching his arm as if to ward off the touch. "It's not just power it seeks purpose." Suddenly, a deafening clang echoed through the workshop, the arrival of the Imperial Guard. 20 men, clad in polished bronze armor, their faces grim and impassive, filled the doorway. Leading them was Commander Zhao, a veteran warrior, known for his ruthless efficiency and unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. He surveyed the scene, the disrupted workshop, the shimmering silver light, Zhuo Feng struggling against the ethereal figure, and Lian cowering in the corner with a single disdainful glance. "Zhuo Feng," Commander Zhao stated, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You are hereby apprehended for endangering the Imperial Court and disrupting the natural order. Your manipulation of the Heavenly Loom is a grave offense, and you will be brought before the Emperor for judgment." As the guards moved to seize him, Zhuo Feng realized he was trapped, caught between the volatile power of the loom, the judgment of its spectral guardian, and the inexorable authority of the Imperial Guard. The unraveling wasn't just about him, it was about the future of the Empire, and perhaps the fate of the very world. Chapter 7. The Loom's Requiem. The air, in the Imperial interrogation chamber, hung thick with incense and a palpable sense of dread. Zhuo Feng, bound to a simple wooden chair with restraints that felt strangely insignificant against the raw power thrumming beneath his skin, observed Commander Zhao with a detached curiosity. The commander, a man sculpted from granite and years of battle, exuded an aura of controlled violence. His movements were precise, economical, and utterly devoid of warmth. Around him, a dozen Imperial guards stood silent, their bronze armor reflecting the flickering candlelight like a scattering of frozen stars. The natural order Commander Zhao spoke of was, of course, the Emperor's absolute rule. But Zhuo Feng suspected this was more than just a political arrest. The presence of the ethereal figure, still clinging to his arm, though now a faint shimmer barely visible to the naked eye, confirmed his darkest suspicions. The Heavenly Loom wasn't merely a martial art, it was a conduit, a link to something ancient and profoundly unsettling. You claim to be the sole heir to the Zhuo clan. Zhao's voice was a low rumble, deliberately devoid of inflection. A claim backed by the manipulation of a forbidden technique. Explain yourself, Weaver. Zhuo Feng chose his words carefully. I sought refuge, Commander. The expectations of my lineage, the weight of a bloodline built on trade and power, suffocated me. The loom offered an escape, a means to reshape my destiny. I intended only to disrupt the plans of those who would exploit my family's influence. He paused, acutely aware of the spectral hand still clinging to him, a cold pressure against his skin. It was a necessary precaution. Necessary? You paralyzed 30 men with threads of energy, men who were loyal to the Emperor. Zhao's hand tightened slightly on the hilt of his sword, a silent warning. You intervened in matters that were not your concern. You threatened the very foundation of this empire. I protected an innocent woman, Zhuo Feng countered, glancing towards Lian, who stood respectfully a short distance away, her face pale but resolute. Master Gang's son Liang was a fool, a brute. He threatened her life. I acted swiftly, decisively. A low murmur rippled through the guards. Zhao silenced them with a single, dismissive wave of his hand. Sentimentality is a weakness. The Emperor desires order, efficiency. Your actions demonstrate a dangerous lack of understanding of these principles. Suddenly, the ethereal figure intensified, its touch growing bolder. Zhuo Feng felt a surge of agonizing clarity, a flood of images and emotions not his own, but amplified, twisted versions of them. He saw his ancestors, not as proud warriors, but as opportunistic merchants, driven by greed and ambition. He saw the potential of the loom, the ability to control, to dominate, to reshape the world according to his will. It was a seductive vision, a promise of absolute power, yet beneath it, he sensed a profound emptiness, a terrifying lack of purpose. It's showing Memi ambition, he gasped, clutching his arm. It's not just power it seeks purpose. The spectral hand recoiled slightly, as if burned by his distress. Before he could fully process the experience, a tremor shook the chamber. The candlelights sputtered and died, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint, pulsating glow of the loom's influence. A high-pitched keening, like the wail of a tormented spirit, filled the air. What is happening? Zhao barked, drawing his sword. The guards instinctively shifted, their movements mirroring his, forming a defensive circle around Zhuo Feng. Then, the loom itself manifested not as a physical object, but as a swirling vortex of silver energy, expanding outwards from Zhuo Feng's body. The air crackled with power. The spectral figure, momentarily detached, reached out again, its touch becoming agonizingly precise, probing his mind with a terrifying intensity. The loomets resisting, Lian cried out, rushing forward. She raised her hand, instinctively attempting to disrupt the energy flow, but her actions were futile. The loom, now fully aware of her presence, turned its focus upon her, the shimmering silver threads extending towards her with terrifying speed. But Zhuo Feng didn't allow her to become a target. With a sudden, explosive burst of energy, he unleashed a focused wave of the loom's power, not to harm, but to contain. The silver thread solidified around Lian, encasing her in a shimmering cocoon. She stood motionless, seemingly unharmed, but clearly under the loom's control. You cannot control the loom, Weaver, Zhao said, his voice laced with a grim satisfaction. It feeds on chaos. And you, it seems, are a particularly rich source. He gestured to the guards. Secure her. As the guards moved to restrain Lian, Zhuo Feng knew this was just the beginning. He had revealed himself, not just as a skilled warrior, but as a conduit for a dangerous power. He was trapped, a pawn in a game far older and more complex than he could have ever imagined. The unraveling wasn't merely about his fate, it was about the fate of the Loom, and perhaps the entire empire. The Loom's requiem had begun. Chapter 8. The Weavers. Silence. The air in the Imperial Guard's headquarters was thick with incense and a palpable sense of unease. Lian, encased in the shimmering silver cocoon, remained perfectly still. It wasn't a prison, not exactly. The threads, cool and strangely comforting, pulsed with a rhythmic energy, a gentle hum that seemed to vibrate directly within her skull. Zhao, a wizened, unnervingly calm warrior, with eyes the color of polished jade, oversaw the examination. He wasn't interrogating Lian, he was observing, analyzing the way the Loom's threads interacted with her nervous system, mapping the delicate pathways of her mind. "Remarkable," Zhao murmured, his voice a low rumble. "The Loom, it recognizes potential. It doesn't simply seize, it cultivates." Weaver Lian possesses an innate sensitivity to flow, a natural affinity for balance qualities the Loom deems worthy of manipulation. Her life force, however, is fragile. Zhuo Feng stood by, his hands clasped behind his back, a carefully constructed facade of composure. He hadn't spoken since the reveal at the gala, conserving his energy, letting Zhao and his men assess the situation. The initial shock of unveiling the Heavenly Loom had subsided, replaced by a chilling realization of its immense power and the even greater danger it represented. "She is compliant," Zhuo Feng finally stated, his voice measured. "The Loom seems content with her. It believes she can be a valuable tool." "Contentment is a dangerous illusion," Heir Zhao countered, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "The Loom does not believe. It consumes. It shapes. And it rarely allows the shape to question its influence." He turned to a young guard, a nervous recruit named Y. "Increase the flow. Observe the subtleties." Y, following instructions, adjusted a series of intricately carved jade discs positioned around Lian's confinement. As the discs shifted, the silver threads tightened, the cocoon subtly reshaping itself, pressing closer to Lian's skin. A faint, ethereal light emanated from her, casting dancing shadows across the chamber walls. Suddenly, a sharp intake of breath escaped Lian. Her eyes, normally dark and holding a quiet sadness, flashed with a silver luminescence, mirroring the cocoon's glow. It wasn't a conscious act of defiance, it felt more like a ripple, a momentary surge of energy within the Loom's control. "The threads are shifting," Zhao observed, his gaze intensifying. "She is resisting, but the resistance is minimal, almost gentle, as if she is learning to navigate the Loom's control, to anticipate its movements." Zhuo Feng's expression tightened. He understood. The Loom wasn't simply absorbing Lian's life force, it was teaching her. It was imprinting itself upon her, layering its will over her own, creating a symbiotic link. The implications were terrifying. If Lian could learn to influence the Loom's flow, to guide it, she could become an unstoppable weapon or a catastrophic threat. "Cease the adjustments, Wei," Zhuo Feng commanded, his voice carrying an unexpected steel. "We cannot afford to exacerbate the situation." As Wei obeyed, the silver threads loosened slightly, the cocoon relaxing. Lian's luminescence faded, her eyes returning to their usual shadowed state. The silence in the room was broken only by the rhythmic pulsing of the Loom's energy. "It's curious, isn't it?" Zhao said, turning to Zhuo Feng. "You arrived in this city, seeking to hide, to escape the expectations of your lineage. Yet, you are inextricably linked to this power, to this ancient art. The Loom has been dormant for centuries, waiting for a worthy vessel. And it has chosen you." "I don't understand," Zhuo Feng replied, his voice strained. "Why me? Why did it choose me to be a weapon instead of simply disappearing?" Perhaps, Zhao said, a cryptic smile playing on his lips. It seeks balance. The Zhuo clan's iron trade has brought prosperity to the empire, but also corruption and unrest. The Heavenly Loom, a power born of chaos and destruction, could restore that balance through decisive, even brutal, measures. He paused, studying Zhuo Feng's face. Or perhaps Heir Zhuo. It simply appreciates a talented tailor. You possess a rare skill, the ability to manipulate matter with your hands, a skill that complements the loom's power perfectly. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the chamber. The silver threads of the cocoon vibrated violently, and Lian let out a strangled cry. The shimmering light intensified, blindingly bright, then abruptly vanished. The cocoon collapsed, scattering silver fragments across the floor. Lian lay motionless, unconscious. Zhuo Feng rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. He gently touched her forehead, and a faint warmth radiated from her skin. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. But they were no longer the dark, accepting eyes of a woman who had been gently guided. They were filled with a cold, unsettling clarity, a knowledge that hadn't been there before. "It showed me," Lian whispered, her voice barely audible. "The loom doesn't seek to control me. It seeks to understand me. It seeks to unravel the very fabric of this empire, to expose its weaknesses, its lies, its corruption." Her gaze locked onto Zhuo Feng's, and for the first time, he saw not a helpless weaver, but a formidable warrior, a weaver of shadows, armed with the most dangerous thread of all truth. The requiem hadn't begun with the loom, it had begun with Lian. Chapter 9. The Unraveling. The aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of bewildered officials, terrified guards, and the lingering scent of ozone and shattered silk. Zhuo Feng, standing amidst the chaos, felt a strange detachment, as if observing a particularly elaborate performance. The emperor, a man known for his pragmatic ruthlessness, was utterly flummoxed. Had authorized the assassination attempt on his daughter, a move that bordered on madness, only to be confronted by a blind tailor, who'd seemingly weaponized the very fabric of existence. This is unprecedented," the emperor finally declared, his voice strained. "Seize the boy. Bring him before me." But before the imperial guard could move, Zhuo Feng calmly rose, his movements fluid and deliberate, a stark contrast to the frantic activity around him. He held up a hand, silencing the assembled men. "I require only a moment," he said, his voice surprisingly resonant, carrying an undercurrent of controlled power. "Let me gather my materials." With practiced ease, he produced a handful of fine silk threads, the exact shade of the ruined gown Liang had been forced to repair, and began to meticulously restitch a small tear in the sleeve of a guard's uniform. The guard, a hulking brute named Zhao, watched with a mixture of confusion and awe. As Zhuo Feng worked, a faint silver sheen emanated from his fingertips, momentarily distorting the air around the thread. It was a subtle demonstration of his power, a warning that went largely unnoticed by the assembled officials, lost in their attempts to comprehend the impossible. Meanwhile, Lian lay recovering in the Imperial Palace's infirmary, a quiet hum of silver energy still radiating from her. The physicians, seasoned in the art of diagnosing the baffling ailments of the court, were utterly baffled. They probed, measured, and examined, but found nothing physically amiss. It was as if the damage to her body had been undone, replaced by something else. Zhuo Feng visited her later that evening, carrying a small, exquisitely crafted box of steamed buns, a detail that seemed to momentarily calm the emperor's anxiety. He knelt beside her bed, observing her with a tenderness that belied the immense power he possessed. "You are recovering well," he said, his voice low. "The loomit has shifted your perspective, has it not?" Lian nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the intricate carvings on the box. "It showed me the flow of the empire, the intricate network of ambition, deceit, and corruption. It revealed the rot that lies beneath the veneer of prosperity. But more than that, she paused, a strange intensity in her gaze. It showed me the potential for change. The loom doesn't seek to destroy, Zhuo Feng continued, a hint of steel entering his voice. It seeks to correct, to balance the scales. Suddenly, she shuddered violently, and a wave of silver light erupted from her, bathing the room in an unsettling glow. The physicians cried out in alarm, but Zhuo Feng swiftly extended a hand, shielding her from the intensity of the energy. When the light subsided, Lian was breathing heavily, her eyes now a brilliant, almost luminous silver. "I understand now," she gasped, her voice echoing with an unfamiliar resonance. "The tapestry is not merely being woven. It is being unraveled." She turned to Zhuo Feng, her expression now devoid of the gentle acceptance he had grown to cherish. "You believe you control the loom, Heir Zhuo. You believe you wield its power. But you misunderstand. The loom doesn't respond to a master. It responds to a catalyst, a focal point for its chaotic energy. And you, with your apparent humility, your feigned weakness, have unknowingly become that focal point." A cold, unsettling smile spread across her face. "I was merely a conduit, a vessel. But the loom, it has awakened within me a greater understanding, a far more potent ability. I can perceive the threads of destiny, not just manipulate them." She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched the white jade needle that Zhuo Feng had gifted her. As her fingers brushed against the cool stone, the needle began to glow with an intense silver light. The air around it shimmered, and the room seemed to distort, as if viewed through a heat haze. "This needle," she said, her voice now laced with a chilling authority, "is not a tool for creation. It is a tool for exposure." She lifted the needle, and with a single deliberate movement, she plunged it into the heart of the imperial seal, the emblem representing the Emperor's divine authority. The room was plunged into darkness, followed by a deafening silence. When the lights were restored, the imperial seal was gone, vanished without a trace. Only the gleaming white jade needle remained, embedded in the floor, pulsing with an ethereal silver light. The Emperor, witnessing this act of blatant defiance, collapsed to his knees, his face a mask of terror. Zhuo Feng stood impassively, watching the unfolding chaos. Lian, her eyes still glowing with silver, turned to him, a single, unsettling phrase escaping her lips. "The Requiem has begun." Chapter 10. The Requiems. Echo the aftermath of Lions. Act was a whirlwind of panicked decrees and hushed whispers. The normally opulent imperial palace felt like a cage, the air thick with the scent of incense and fear. Zhuo Feng, remaining in unsettling calm amidst the storm, moved with a quiet grace that bordered on unnerving. He oversaw the immediate capture of the remaining shadow assassins, a task rendered almost effortless by a subtle shift in the air, a tingling sensation that induced momentary disorientation in their ranks. He didn't order bloodshed, he simply adjusted their equilibrium. The Emperor, a man once radiating authority, was now a shell, reduced to whimpering obedience. His advisors, a collection of wizened officials and ambitious schemers, scrambled to understand what had happened, attempting to decipher the implications of a vanished imperial seal. Their efforts were, of course, futile. Zhuo Feng offered no explanations, no justifications. He simply continued to accumulate influence, leveraging his newfound power with a disconcerting blend of generosity and ruthlessness. Lian, however, was the true enigma. The silver light in her eyes hadn't faded, but instead seemed to deepen, like a reflection of a distant, unsettling galaxy. She remained in the center of the chaos, seemingly detached, observing the unfolding drama with an unnerving serenity. She had begun spending hours in the palace gardens, meticulously examining the intricate patterns of the moss on ancient stones. Her movements, strangely fluid, almost predatory. Zhuo Feng, ever observant, noticed her preoccupation. "You are studying the earth, Lian," he said one evening as they sat by a small fountain, the only source of light in the darkening palace. "But you are seeing more than just patterns." "I am seeing the threads, master," she replied, her voice low and measured. "The threads of consequence, of disruption." The imperial seal was a symbol, yes, but it was also a constraint, a barrier between the emperor and the truth. He didn't press her, understanding that probing too deeply would only increase her unease. Instead, he observed her carefully. He noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the almost imperceptible flexing of her muscles. The white jade needle, still embedded in the palace floor, pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, casting dancing shadows on the mosaic tiles. "Your actions were bold, Lian," Zhuo Feng said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You exposed a fundamental flaw in the structure of power. You revealed that even the most sacred symbols can be shattered." "And you, master," she responded, turning her head to meet his gaze. "You harnessed the shattered fragments. You understood the Requiem song." He didn't understand what she meant. Not entirely. The Requiem, as she called it, felt like a concept, a force, a dark, intricate symphony woven from chaos and possibility. But he sensed that it was inextricably linked to her, to the awakening within her that had begun with the touch of the white jade needle. "Tell me," he asked, his voice laced with a subtle challenge. "What did you perceive, Lian, when you touched the needle?" She hesitated, her eyes shimmering with the silver light. "I saw the Emperor's lineage. Not just his family tree, master, but the echoes of every decision made, every betrayal committed, every act of kindness bestowed. I saw the threads of his rule, twisted and corrupted, leading him to this moment. This precipice." A chilling smile spread across her face, mirroring the one head glimpsed during the silk gala. He believed he was protecting his empire. He thought he was wielding power. But he was merely a puppet, dancing to a tune he could not hear. "The threads of destiny are not controlled, master. They are revealed." Suddenly, the fountain began to flow with an unnatural intensity, the water surging upwards in a chaotic torrent, swirling and foaming. The silver light emanating from the needle intensified, bathing the room in an almost blinding radiance. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and profoundly unsettling. "The Requiem is reaching its crescendo," Lian murmured, her voice a hypnotic drone. "The threads are unraveling. The fabric of reality is beginning to fray." As she spoke, the mosaic tiles beneath the needle began to shift and distort, the intricate patterns dissolving into a chaotic swirl of color. The very foundations of the palace seemed to tremble. Zhuo Feng watched, his expression unreadable, as Lian raised the white jade needle again, this time not toward the floor, but toward the emperor, who was now cowering before her, his eyes wide with terror. "This," Lian declared, her voice resonating with a terrifying power, "is not an act of destruction. It is an act of clarity." With a single swift movement, she plunged the needle into the emperor's chest. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. This time, the silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, but a palpable void, a crushing weight that seemed to suffocate the very air. When the guards, who had been frozen in stunned disbelief, finally regained their senses, they found the emperor slumped on the floor, his body perfectly still, a single gleaming white jade needle embedded in his heart. Above him, hanging in the air, suspended by threads of pure silver light, was a miniature replica of the imperial seal, fractured, distorted, utterly powerless. Lian turned to Zhuo Feng, her eyes blazing with silver light. "The Requiem has spoken," she said, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "And now, we begin the reconstruction." Chapter 11. The Loom of Dust. The air, in the palace, hung thick with the scent of ozone, and something subtly metallic, like aged silver. The remnants of the imperial silk gala, a scattered velvet drape here, a spilled tankard of jade wine there lay untouched, frozen in a tableau of terror. Zhuo Feng, clad now in a simple, charcoal-gray tunic that concealed the subtle shimmer of his inner energy, observed the scene with an unsettling calm. Lian stood beside him, the white jade needle still radiating a soft, pulsating light, a miniature echo of the devastation she had wrought. The Emperor's personal guard, a collection of the finest and most rigorously trained warriors in the Empire, remained suspended in positions of frozen horror, their limbs locked in impossible angles, their expressions masks of bewildered shock. Zhuo Feng hadn't moved them, he hadn't fought them, had simply unraveled them. The Heavenly Loom's influence was a delicate weave, a manipulation of the very essence of movement, and his touch was devastatingly precise. "The whispers are louder now," Lian murmured, her voice a low, hypnotic drone. "The threads are unraveling. The fabric of reality is beginning to fray." As she spoke, the shattered remains of the imperial seal, a grotesque, fragmented sculpture of a dragon, wrestling a phoenix, began to shimmer. It pulsed with an unstable energy, growing brighter, then dimmer, as if desperately seeking a stable form. The mosaic tiles beneath Zhuo Feng's feet continued to shift and distort, the intricate patterns dissolving into a chaotic swirl of color. The very foundations of the palace seemed to tremble, a low, resonant hum vibrating through the stone. Zhuo Feng watched, his expression unreadable, as Lian raised the white jade needle again, this time not toward the floor, but toward the Emperor's now lifeless form. The needle's light intensified, bathing the room in an almost painful brilliance. He could feel the strain, the exertion of manipulating such vast quantities of energy, a sensation akin to threading 100 silk threads simultaneously, each humming with potential. "This," Lian declared, her voice resonating with a terrifying power, "is not an act of destruction. It is an act of clarity." With a single swift movement, she plunged the needle into the Emperor's chest. The moment the jade pierced the flesh, a wave of pure, raw energy exploded outwards. It wasn't violent, not in the traditional sense. Instead, it was as if a vast, intricate tapestry, the Empire's history, its laws, its very soul was being meticulously unpicked, thread by thread. The frozen guards shuddered, their expressions shifting from horror to a strange, vacant serenity. Even the air seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself were being momentarily destabilized. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. This time, the silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, but a palpable void, a crushing weight that seemed to suffocate the very air. The faint, humming energy surrounding Lian's needle solidified, coalescing into a shimmering sphere of silver light. Within this sphere, they saw not the Emperor's corpse, but a projection, a vivid ghostly replay of his life, from his birth to his final panicked moments. It was a horrifying spectacle, revealing a reign built on corruption, fueled by vanity, and ultimately defined by a crippling fear of change. When the guards, who had been frozen in stunned disbelief, finally regained their senses, they found the Emperor slumped on the floor, his body perfectly still, a single, gleaming white jade needle embedded in his heart. Above him, hanging in the air, suspended by threads of pure silver light, was a miniature replica of the imperial seal, fractured, distorted, utterly powerless. The original seal had vanished, swallowed by the energy released during Lian's act. Lian turned to Zhuo Feng, her eyes blazing with silver light. "The Requiem has spoken," she said, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "And now, we begin the reconstruction." She extended a hand, and with a gesture that defied gravity, she gathered the fragmented threads of the miniature imperial seal. The silver light intensified, weaving itself around the shattered pieces, meticulously piecing them back together. It wasn't a simple repair. The new seal was different, subtly altered. It was smaller, more refined, and etched with a single elegant glyph, a symbol of balance, not of dominion. The Emperor sought to control, Lian explained, her voice barely a whisper. He attempted to impose his will upon the flow of the loom. This is a more appropriate reflection of the Empire's potential. Zhuo Feng stepped forward, taking the needle from her hand. He examined it, tracing the smooth curve of the jade with a calloused finger. The energies are volatile, he observed, his voice low. This was not simply a disruption, Lian. It was a reset, a deliberate fracturing of the established order. He glanced at the frozen guards, a hint of grim satisfaction in his eyes. The question remains, he said, turning back to Lian. What will the Empire become? Stitched together by your hand. Chapter 12. The weavers, gambit. The rain had ceased, leaving the capital washed clean and smelling of damp silk and charcoal. Yet, the air in the garment district was thick with a different kind of humidity, the palpable tension of a disrupted order, of a hidden power revealed. Zhuo Feng, no longer the timid tailor's assistant, moved with a quiet authority, overseeing the dismantling of Master Zheng's operation. The once opulent workshops, brimming with arrogant silk merchants and sharp-tongued clerks, were now a hive of controlled chaos, workers diligently sorting through fabrics, their movements dictated by Zhuo Feng's measured commands. Liang, stripped of his arrogance and consumed by a simmering rage, was a pathetic figure, shoveling ore from the newly reopened mines outside the city walls. He hadn't anticipated the swiftness of Zhuo Feng's retribution. The guards who'd initially escorted him were now a small, weary contingent, overseen by a squad of Zhuo Feng's newly recruited warriors, young men, mostly drawn from the lower districts and trained in the basics of the Heavenly Loom. They moved with a disconcerting grace, their eyes holding a silent, watchful intensity that made Liang shrink further into his misery. Meanwhile, Lian occupied the highest workshop in what remained of Master Zheng's district. It was a space transformed, no longer cluttered with spoiled silks and petty grievances, but meticulously organized, the air filled with the rhythmic clatter of the loom and the delicate scent of dyes. She was working on a tapestry unlike any seen before, a vast depiction of the celestial river, flowing through a landscape stitched with shimmering threads of silver, a subtle echo of the power she now wielded. Zhuo Feng observed her from a corner, his gaze lingering on her hands, moving with a precision that bordered on the unnerving. The energy is complex, Lian, he said, his voice low, approaching her as she carefully manipulated a strand of the silver thread. It's not simply weaving fabric. It's rewriting the very fabric of causality. Lian didn't look up, her fingers continuing their intricate work. The Empire has always been a tapestry of conflicting desires. Zhuo Feng. I merely unraveled the most egregious threads and began to reweave with a more balanced design. You altered the imperial seal, Zhuo Feng stated, a hint of apprehension in his voice. The fragment of the miniature seal, now rendered useless, lay on a small table, a stark reminder of the chaos they had unleashed. It was becoming a tool of oppression, she responded, finally lifting her head. Her eyes, still shimmering with the silver light, held a depth of understanding that unsettled him. The Emperor's intentions were pure, but his methods were flawed. He sought to force the loom, to control its flow. The new seal is designed to guide, not to command, to respond to need, not to dictate it. She gestured to the tapestry, the celestial river pulsing with a faint, internal light. This is not about dominion, Zhuo Feng. It's about harmony, about ensuring the proper flow of energy within the Empire. Just then, a young guard, one of the initiates Zhuo Feng had trained, entered the workshop, his face pale. Master, there's a messenger. From the Emperor's court. Da-da. A wave of unease washed over Zhuo Feng. The Emperor, a man known for his rigid adherence to tradition and his distrust of unconventional power, had not sent an envoy since the incident in the tea house. The messenger, a nervous official clad in ceremonial robes, presented a sealed scroll. As Zhuo Feng broke the seal, he read the message. It was brief and chilling. The Emperor demands an explanation. He wishes to understand the events of the Imperial Silk Gala. He requests your presence at the Imperial Palace. Immediately. He understands nothing, Lian said, her voice dangerously quiet. She picked up the jade needle, turning it over in her fingers. He seeks to control the storm, to harness its power for his own benefit. He will find only ruin. Zhuo Feng considered her words. He realized that the Emperor's demand wasn't a request for understanding, but a trap. A calculated move to gain control of the Heavenly Loom, to weaponize its power. He glanced at Lian, a silent question in his eyes. Then we will meet him as he wishes, Zhuo Feng said, his voice firm. But we will meet him on our terms. He retrieved the shattered remains of the miniature imperial seal from the table, holding it up to the light. This disruption has created an opportunity, Lian. A chance to introduce a new element into the Empire's balance. A reminder that even the most powerful cannot control the threads of fate. With a swift movement, he began to unravel the remaining fragments of the miniature seal, feeding them into the jade needle in Lian's hand. The silver light intensified, weaving itself into a new, intricate pattern, coalescing around the needle. It wasn't a replica of the Imperial seal, but something far more sophisticated, far more dangerous. It was a miniature loom itself, perfectly formed, pulsing with the raw energy of the Heavenly Loom. This, Lian declared, her voice imbued with a chilling certainty, is a seed, and we will plant it within the heart of the Empire. The final glyph, previously obscured, shimmered into view, a serpent consuming its own tail, a symbol of eternal renewal and, subtly, of inescapable consequence. Chapter 13. The serpents embraced the air in Zhuo Feng's workshop, hung thick with the scent of silk, beeswax, and something subtly metallic, the lingering ghost of the Heavenly Loom's energy. Lian, normally a whirlwind of quiet diligence, moved with an unnerving grace, her fingers dancing over the miniature loom. Now fully formed and radiating a cool, silvery light. The workshop, a cramped corner of the garment district previously occupied by dust and despair, was transformed. Tapestries depicting stylized silver threads interwoven with blossoming plum blossoms adorned the walls, and the rhythmic hum of the miniature loom formed a hypnotic counterpoint to the distant city sounds. Master Gang, a hulking presence even in his distress, stood frozen, his mouth agape, a single copper coin clutched in his trembling hand. Head arrived with a retinue of armed guards, expecting retribution, expecting to reclaim his business, to see Zhuo Feng, the blind beggar, brought low. Instead, he was witnessing the impossible. What is this? He stammered, the arrogance that had defined him for decades stripped away, replaced by genuine, primal fear. Zhuo Feng didn't answer immediately. He meticulously traced a delicate line on a silk swatch with the jade needle, pausing only to glance at Lian, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. This, he finally said, his voice low and measured, is a weapon of subtle influence, a tool to reshape destinies. The miniature loom wasn't simply replicating the Imperial seal, it was actively weaving a new one, a tapestry of control, designed not to seize power directly, but to unravel it from within. The serpent glyph, now fully revealed, pulsed with a terrifying beauty, a constant reminder of the cycle of creation and destruction, of beginnings and inevitable endings. You intend to manipulate the Emperor? Gang's voice cracked with incredulity. Not manipulate, Master Gang, Zhuo Feng corrected, his eyes holding a chilling depth. Guide. The Emperor seeks to control the Heavenly Loom. We will show him that control is an illusion. We will show him the loom's true nature, a current, capable of pulling the strongest of currents along with it. The guards, sensing the shift in power, began to murmur amongst themselves, their weapons lowering instinctively. The Imperial Guard, dispatched by the Emperor himself, a ruthless, ambitious man named Zhao, were already on their way, led by the formidable General Wei, a veteran of countless campaigns. Wei was a man who valued loyalty and strength above all else, a man who instinctively distrusted anything he didn't understand. Just as he was arriving, a messenger burst into the workshop, breathless and pale. "Sir, the Emperor demands your immediate presence. He claims to have witnessed a miracle, a display of impossible power." Zhuo Feng paused, considering. This was the trap he had anticipated. Zhao, blinded by the potential of the Heavenly Loom, was attempting to seize control, to bend Zhuo Feng to his will. "Let him come," Zhuo Feng said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But let him understand one thing: the threads of fate are not his to command." As the Emperor and his entourage arrived, the workshop was bathed in an unnerving silence. Zhao, a man built like a fortress, surveyed the scene with a mixture of bewilderment and barely concealed fury. He gestured towards the miniature loom, his face flushed with a mixture of arrogance and suppressed rage. "You! This device. Explain yourself." Zhuo Feng rose slowly, deliberately, the shattered remains of the imperial seal still clutched in his hand. He walked toward Zhao, not with the swagger of a conqueror, but with the quiet confidence of a man who understood the game far better than his opponent. "The imperial seal," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that silenced the room, "was merely a reflection of your ambition, a crude attempt to bind the flow of power. This," he gestured to the miniature loom, "is a more honest representation, a mirror to the true nature of the Heavenly Loom, its ability to unravel, to rebuild, to choose." He deliberately activated the loom, weaving a complex pattern of silver threads that spiraled outwards, not towards Zhao, but towards the Emperor's advisors, towards the ranks of the Imperial Guard. The threads didn't attack, they didn't paralyze, they simply observed. They subtly influenced, planting suggestions, magnifying anxieties, amplifying existing doubts. "You believe you can control the flow of power?" Zhuo Feng's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You believe that the fate of an empire can be dictated by a single man? The Heavenly Loom teaches a different lesson. All things are connected. All things can be broken, and all things can be rewoven." As he spoke, the miniature loom continued its intricate dance, the serpent glyph glowing with an increasing intensity. The Emperor, a man of considerable intellect despite his vanity, suddenly recoiled, clutching his head. He began to babble incoherently, muttering about shadows, about betrayal, about the inescapable cycle of decay. Zhao, sensing the shift in momentum, roared with fury, ordering his guards to seize Zhuo Feng. But before they could move, the silver threads tightened, not against the guards, but against Zhao himself, subtly constricting his breathing, slowing his reflexes, subtly disorienting him. Zhuo Feng smiled, a genuine, unsettling smile. "The serpent's embrace," he whispered, "is a patient one." Chapter 14. The serpents embraced the dust of the imperial silk gala, still clung to the opulent tea-house, a gritty counterpoint to the shimmering silks and forced smiles of the assembled dignitaries. The air, thick with incense and the scent of aged tea, now carried a distinct note of unease. Zhuo Feng, standing amidst the chaos, was a study in serene power. He hadn't moved since the revelation, his blindfold still secured around his eyes, his posture radiating a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs and the attempts at arrest. Lian, her face pale but resolute, stood beside him, clutching the jade needle like a talisman. The Emperor, a man named Jian, known more for his pronouncements than his judgment, was a crumpled heap on a richly embroidered cushion. He periodically let out a strangled gasp, his face slick with cold sweat, and pointed a trembling finger at the walls, muttering about shifting shadows and a vile tapestry of deception. His personal guard, a formidable force of steel and discipline, were frozen in a tableau of bewildered confusion. Zhao, the imperial chancellor, a man who had once regarded Zhuo Feng with thinly veiled contempt, was now a statue of controlled fury, his hand hovering near the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "Observe," Zhuo Feng said, his voice a low, resonant hum that cut through the stunned silence. He extended his hand, and with a deliberate, fluid motion, began to manipulate the air around him. It wasn't a visible movement, not in the way a hand could physically grasp something. Instead, the air shimmered, subtly distorting the patterns of the hanging tapestries, making the reflections in the polished table legs dance with an unsettling irregularity. "The serpent's embrace," he whispered, "is a patient one." The effect was slow, insidious. Zhao's breathing became shallower, his jaw clenched tighter. The faint tremor in his hand intensified, and a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He shifted his gaze, his eyes flickering nervously from Zhuo Feng to Lian, and then back again, a palpable sense of paranoia creeping into his expression. Around him, the other guards, sensing the shift, began to experience a similar unease, a prickling sensation at the back of their necks, a subtle disorientation, a nagging feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The Heavenly Loom wasn't about brute force. It was about amplification, about exposing the hidden fractures in the fabric of power. Zhuo Feng hadn't paralyzed them with a sudden burst of energy. He had gently, meticulously, begun to unravel the carefully constructed walls of their certainty. "You believe you can control the flow of power?" Zhuo Feng's voice dripped with sarcasm, amplified subtly by the loom's influence. "You believe that the fate of an empire can be dictated by a single man? The Heavenly Loom teaches a different lesson. All things are connected. All things can be broken, and all things can be rewoven." The words hung in the air, laced with a terrifying implication. He wasn't threatening them with death. He was suggesting that their power, their authority, their very understanding of the world, was built on a foundation of sand. Suddenly, one of the guards, a towering veteran named Lu, stumbled, clutching his chest. He gasped, a look of stark terror replacing the grim determination in his eyes. "The river, it flows backwards," he choked out, before collapsing to the floor in a heap. Panic, like a wildfire, began to spread through the ranks. The Emperor, now completely incapacitated, shrieked unintelligibly, his body racked with spasms. Zhao, his face contorted with rage and fear, barked orders, but his voice lacked conviction, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. The guards, consumed by a collective sense of disorientation and dread, struggled to maintain their composure, their movements jerky and unpredictable. Lian, her hand steady, continued to hold the jade needle, her gaze fixed on Zhuo Feng. She understood instinctively that he wasn't simply observing, he was weaving. The silver threads of the loom pulsed with an intensifying light, a miniature representation of a serpent coiling around a shattered pearl. "It's not an attack," she said, her voice calm and reassuring, though she could feel the subtle tightening in her own chest, the faint constriction of her breath. "It's a reminder." Zhuo Feng nodded, a flicker of something akin to melancholy in his blind eyes. "The Emperor believes he controls the narrative, the flow of influence. The loom shows him the truth. He fears the power he doesn't understand." He paused, then addressed Zhao, his voice now laced with a chilling precision. "Chancellor, your ambition is admirable, but your understanding is tragically flawed. You seek to control through force. I offer you a glimpse beyond the veil. You misunderstand the nature of power. It is not about possession, but about connection. It is not about domination, but about influence." Zhao, his face pale and strained, could only stare, utterly defeated. The silver threads had tightened their grip, subtly manipulating his thoughts, amplifying his insecurities, whispering doubts into his mind. "Release him," Zhuo Feng commanded, his voice carrying a weight that demanded obedience. "Spare the Emperor a slow, dignified demise. Let him simply remember." A grizzled officer, sensing the complete breakdown of order, reluctantly obeyed, lifting Zhao's limp body. As the last vestiges of resistance faded, Zhuo Feng turned to Lian. "You saw the light in a blind man's soul, now let that light guide the Empire." He then gestured with a sweeping movement of his hand, and the entire garment district, the stalls, the workers, the merchants fell silent, all their movements synchronized, all their expressions mirroring a shared sense of awe and fear. "Now," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, "let us begin the reckoning." Chapter 15. The Weaver's Gambit. The rain had stopped, leaving the capital slick and reflecting the flickering lanterns that now illuminated the transformed garment district. It wasn't simply orderly, it was sculpted. The stalls were arranged in perfect geometric patterns. The merchants stood motionless, not in idle conversation, but examining bolts of silk with an unnerving stillness, their hands moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The air hummed with a subtle energy, a tangible manifestation of Zhuo Feng's control, silent testament to the Heavenly Loom. Liang was, as Zhuo Feng had predicted, a figure of bewildered misery in the iron mines outside the city walls. He hadn't been subjected to immediate physical torture, but a constant, low-grade misery, the endless, back-breaking labor, compounded by the knowledge that his father, the once arrogant Master Zheng, was utterly powerless. Zhuo Feng had sent a single, perfectly folded note, sealed with the imperial crest. "Your arrogance will be your tomb." As for Master Zheng, he sat in his opulent shop, now meticulously arranged by Lian, examining a sample of jade silk, a tremor of unease running through him. He was a shadow of his former self, constantly glancing at the young seamstress, a silent plea for reassurance in his eyes. He had agreed to a partnership, a consultancy role advising Zhuo Feng on the intricacies of the silk trade, a humiliating concession to the power he had so carelessly dismissed. Zhuo Feng, meanwhile, was working with Lian. He had instructed her to oversee the restoration of the district, not just for aesthetic reasons, but to subtly reinforce the flow of energy. Each needle she used was imbued with a fraction of his power, a thread of the loom woven into the very fabric of the district's commerce. Had found a strange satisfaction in the meticulous work, the deliberate precision echoing the movements of the loom. "The Emperor's guard remains loyal, of course," Zhao, the Chancellor, said, his voice still carrying a trace of the mental manipulation Zhuo Feng had employed. He stood nervously in his refurbished office, a far less ostentatious space than before, observing Lian as she adjusted the height of a display of brocades. But the whispers, they're growing. They speak of a phantom, a puppeteer who controls the city with invisible threads. Zhuo Feng didn't turn. "Whispers are born of fear, Chancellor. Fear of the unknown. Fear of losing control. I merely offered a glimpse of reality. The threads, you see, don't dictate. They guide." He picked up a spool of shimmering silver thread, holding it up to the light. "Think of a river, Chancellor. It doesn't force itself upon the land. It carves its path, guided by the contours of the terrain. I merely offer a channel." "And you, my lord, are the river," Zhao finished, the words laced with a grudging respect, bordering on terror. Suddenly, a frantic messenger burst into the room, breathless and covered in soot. "My lord!" A disturbance at the imperial palace. "The Emperor is fallen ill. Symptoms mirroring those of a severe venom poisoning." Zhuo Feng's hand stilled. The silver thread in his grasp pulsed faintly. "The Emperor," he murmured, his voice losing its deceptive calm. "A calculated risk." It seemed someone sought to neutralize a threat that, ironically, was always contained within the palace walls. He rose, his movements fluid and silent, like a shadow detaching itself from the wall. Lian followed, her face etched with a quiet determination. It appears our weaver's gambit has caught the attention of those who prefer the darkness. As they moved towards the palace, Zhuo Feng subtly adjusted the flow of energy around him, a delicate tightening of the loom's threads. The guards, normally a chaotic, unpredictable force, moved with a strange, almost choreographed efficiency, opening pathways, clearing obstacles, as if anticipating their arrival. Reaching the Emperor's chambers, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Physicians frantically administered remedies, their movements frantic and ineffective. The Emperor, lying on a silk-covered divan, was a pale, sweating figure, writhing in agony. As not reacting to the antidotes, a senior physician stammered, his eyes wide with bewilderment. It's as if the poison is being actively suppressed. Not neutralized, but contained. Zhuo Feng approached the Emperor's bedside. His eyes, even in the dimly lit room, seemed to shimmer with an inner light. He knelt beside the ailing Emperor, his hand hovering above the man's chest. He inhaled deeply, a subtle shift occurring within him, a deepening of the loom's influence. "I believe," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can help you understand what truly poisoned you, Emperor. It wasn't a poison, but a reflection, a concentrated dose of your own fear. You feared my power, Chancellor, and that fear manifested itself in a substance that sought to dismantle me." But now he touched the Emperor's brow, and a faint silver light emanated from his fingertips. The Emperor's convulsions subsided, his breathing became smoother, and a look of dawning comprehension replaced the terror in his eyes. "The threads," the Emperor murmured, his voice weak but clear. You are weaving a new reality."